women. They looked like they could be old because of the way they dressed, but actually they were young women, unmarried, I think, when this picture was taken. But they were sort of in the same group. It was Aunt Mary Ann and Mother and Emma Knudsen that had their pictures taken together. Now, Emma married John Knudsen, Mother married Andrew Jensen, and Mary Ann Munson married Jim Munson. She was a Polson.
She was a Polson.
Yeah, Mary Ann Munson was a Polson, and she was a sister to Ras Polson. And
wasn't she sister to?
She was a
grandmother?
sister. No, Mary Ann was the sister-in-law to my mother.
I see.
You see, Mother was a Munson, and she married a Munson and married Uncle Jim. And he's the one that went on a mission over to Norway. Paul and I are very good friends yet. We were about the same age, and of course we played together for years and years down on that lower street. We went to high school together in the same crowd, and took girls that went together. I call him up every once in a while and talk with him, and he calls me.
He's in Salt Lake.
He lives up there, on 15th East, 1590 South on 15th East.
He's right around the corner. He's not far away at all.
No, he's just that shopping center over there. And he's just south of there, about a half dozen houses.
Other than that, you don't remember anything about the courtships or?
No, I've never heard any stories about courtships. Just what my imagination would tell.
But I also wanted to ask you, you said that your father caught up with his brother there in Montana when he was shearing in Montana.
Yeah.
He traveled about then to get work with sheep, or?
Father would go start shearing here in the early spring, and even in the winter time he would shear in barns and sheds for these people who had purebred sheep that they wanted dressed just so. He was an expert at smoothing out and dressing them just the way they wanted them for display at the fairs and different places, like the State Fair and other places. They exhibit their stock for prizes, you see.
Like a poodle pet dog today.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember seeing those old shears.
I used to have a pair that Father fixed for me, and I shore my sheep for years myself, and put it in sacks and took it down to the depot to sell it.
What do they give you for a sack of wool?
Oh, possibly you get all the way from $100 to $200 a sack of wool.
For one sack of wool?
Well, you could put in, say, 200 pounds in the sack.
How many
more than that, 300 pounds.
How many sheep?
These were big, long sacks that you had to hang on a ring. And you'd get up in those and stomp the wool down, and so you'd get it filled up. I don't know how many fleeces you'd put in, but as I say, you get 300 or 400 pounds in one sack.
So that's about more than a man could lift.
Oh, you couldn't lift them.
If you couldn't lift them, it must have been over 200 pounds.
They always put a pole under them to lift them up on a wedge, you know,
Uh-huh.
and get a leverage on them. They did that with the shearing crowds too. They would put a stick of poling underneath there on a wedge and lift up on them while they took that ring off and sewed the sack. And then when the sack was already sewed at the top so nothing would come out, then they'd drop that pole down and the sack would fall out of the rack. And they'd roll it out into the yard and stack the sacks of wool.
How'd they get them onto the wagon? A couple of men lift them up?
Yes.
That must have been 3 or 4 pounds.
They would have long rows of these sacks in the shearing crowd. I went up to twice with Father to Wyoming to tie wool, and the big companies. Wyoming is a great place for sheep, and we were right west of Rawlins, Wyoming. That's one of the main towns and on the highway. And when you go east on Wyoming Road highway, you go through Rawlins and then you go through Cheyenne. Cheyenne's a little further east. That's the capital city. And Rawlins was quite a place. It was a gambling place when I went there. And Father, the first trip I took there, he took me around sightseeing. He showed me these gambling dens and how these fellows would sit for hours, bleary-eyed, and gamble. And I remember it seemed like the place we stayed was like a home. If it was a hotel, it was a very small one. We paid 50 cents a piece a night to stay there. I would earn, $1.50 a day. That was pretty good pay then, you know, for a boy of 16.
I wanted to ask you about the sacks of wool. Now, I know you said you don't know how many fleece, but I don't even have any idea if it was 10 or 1,000.
Well, a fleece would weigh, a very good fleece would weigh 12 pounds. Usually they're around 9 or 10 pounds on the average. So you can take, for 300 pounds in the bag, that would be about
30 sheep.
30 fleeces.
Or a little less if they were. So that was about $3 a sheep or better. $3 to $4 for the wool of the sheep,
Yeah.
which you did once a year.
Sometimes we sold a pretty good price.
Tell me about the trips that he'd make to Montana and Wyoming. Tell me about the trip that you made to Wyoming.
Well, the first time I came into Salt Lake was on this trip with the shearers to go to Wyoming.
And all of it.
And I was 16 when I made my first trip.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed at a hotel down here. I think it was the Cullen Hotel. It was one of the regular Sanpete hotels. That's where I met Uncle Silver the first time. This man,
Renegade uncle.
yeah, he came down from there, and he was with a gang of men down there that he knew, probably drank a little with. I think he kind of got sore at Father, like I may have gotten sore when he threw me out of that candy store. Uncle Silver was a carouser and a drinker, and he probably didn't like to live up to the laws too well. He was out celebrating so much of the time. When Father found him, he was working for a lady up in Belfast, Montana.
Excuse me, do you think that he left Mount Pleasant when your father was the marshal? He left
Yeah.
long before he did?
You know,
He was working for a lady in Belfast, Montana.
yeah. and he never did marry, as far as records show. But he died up there in that same place when he was on that ranch for that lady.
So you were your first time into Salt Lake. Did you go by train up there?
We took the train into Salt Lake, then we transferred to, I remember when we walked across town from the DNRG depot over to the Oregon Short Line. And
that was across town?
Yeah, well, it was across the part of the town. There's 3 or 4 blocks, I think. And that was the first looks I got into Salt Lake City. Of course, that was the slums down in there. But then we went around town and went to Cullen Hotel, and I think that's the one that was. That's where most of the Sanpete fellows stayed. Then we took a passage on the train out to, and we were to, they didn't have a regular stop, but there at Wyoming and Daly Sheep Ranch. But they stopped at a little town that was right close there, and then there's a whistle stop. And we stopped and unloaded there. And we went from there, of course, the Daily would send a team of horses out with the wagon, and we would load our stuff on there and then go into the yard. And they had a bunkhouse, or the ranch house there right next to the shearing corral. And we ate all of our meals together, and they would cook hot cakes and different things. They had cooks, regular cooks there. And it was quite a place, and hobos that came through on the train used to stop there occasionally and get a job during the shearing season, because they could get good food for a while and on their way. In fact, some of the hobos would tromp wool, and I got acquainted with some of them. They'd tell us stories about how they used to travel over the country, you know. I was rather fascinated with those travel stories of these hobos telling about life in Chicago and so on.
So you got to meet some of the hobos.
Yeah.
How long would you stay there?
We would work there for 2 weeks to 6 weeks to a month.
Had a lot of sheep?
Oh, all the people around that area that had sheep herds would bring them in there. And we had some pretty fierce weather there sometimes, and they'd lose hundreds of heads of sheep. See, they'd shear them, and then they couldn't stand the cold.
Why didn't they wait to shear?
Well, we usually didn't shear during the wet season, but of course they couldn't have, Daly couldn't have all those men there living on end, and for the sake of the other sheep men. So they usually went ahead and shore the sheep, and they tried to take care of them as best they could.
Daly,
and as I say, Daly was a wealthy sheep man and operated this shearing corral. I've passed by that place since then on the road as we went east on the. We could see the shearing corral from where we were on the road, because it was right. The road runs parallel with the railroad there, and that's how we got in there on the railroad.
You actually had a very short distance to go by wagon from the railroad.
Yes, it's a very short distance. Wamsutter was the little burg where the train stopped, the whistle stopped. Wamsutter, if you can imagine that. That sounds like an Indian name.
So you'd work there during the shearing season? And that would be, and you did that twice then?
I did that twice.
2 seasons. How long of a trip was it from Mount Pleasant up to Wyoming? And how much did it run for the fare?
Oh, I imagine the fare was around $8.
But you made $1.50 a day.
Yeah, we made $1.50 a day.
How many days did it take? I know you said you stopped at the hotel.
I'd usually come home with a little less than $100.
How many days trip was it? That is, you left Mount Pleasant, took a day to get to Salt Lake,
It
and
took a day. We always had to stop at Salt Lake at night because the train left down to Sanpete at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it would get into Salt Lake about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. So we had to get a room and stay and wait for a train that went out on the Union Pacific. Because that's the Union Pacific that goes east, through Wyoming.
So then you'd catch that early in the morning?
We'd catch that in the morning and ride out and get to our destination about noon for the next day and get located in our bunks. They had bunks built on the side of the shearing trail, shed, and we rolled into those bunks. They had hay for a mattress. We'd stretch our bedding out on those, and each had their own bunk.
But your father also went to Montana on a similar arrangement.
Yes, I didn't go with him up there. He even went to South Dakota some years to show sheep.
When he went to Wyoming, he probably always worked for Daly.
He always went daily, did his business through the Spring City men. Brad Allred was one of the men that usually dealt with the sheepmen to come and shear the Daly was a regular place of going for these people. They'd go about every spring. Even before I went out there, we used to get letters from Father, and we would wait to open them until we got home. We couldn't. The funny part about it was we couldn't read it because it was written in Danish.
He wrote in Danish to your mother?
He wrote in Danish to Mother. Of course, her folks were Danish, and she learned the Danish language as well as he. She didn't talk it nearly as well as he did. He was very good at it because he'd been raised in Denmark. And he evidently had a pretty good education because he had a very nice hand at writing. And those letters, I learned what the first part of it was. And usually we'd probably say, dear so-and-so and children, dear wife and children. But he'd write, Kære hustru og barn. Well, I learned what that was. I could tell that meant dear wife and children. And the rest of it, of course, I couldn't read. Of course, we were usually anxious to see whether there was any money in it, too. Father usually sent his checks home for the family to use.
He was paid by check then?
Yes, they paid by check.
Why is it that Daly and people in Montana and so on would hire help from clear down in Utah? Just wasn't enough shearers around, I guess.
Just because they got better laborers, shearers from down this way. Now, Father, as I said, was an expert man with the blades. He shore sheep, and when they shore them, you could see they looked like they were shore. There wasn't wool hanging everywhere on them.
How about you when you had the job?
Well, I did pretty well. I learned somewhat how to smooth them out.
And your father learned that when he came here, or did he know that before? Oh, wait a minute. Your grandfather. Well, no, your father.
You know, I never did find out. I know that he shore sheep from almost from the time he came.
Uh-huh.
Now, it may be that they shore their own sheep. They wouldn't have very many over in Denmark. They would. It's probable that every family would have a few to get the wool to make clothing, things like that, because they did make their own clothing, you know.
It had some warm ones in Denmark.
Yes, I imagine they did have a few sheep over in Denmark.
Did you ever get back to Denmark to see?
Yes, I was over there, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when we went over to pick up David when he was on his mission, you know. We went with Paul and Lois over there, and we hired a car, a little Opel, I think it was, station wagon, and traveled all around. And it's very economical on gas, and we got along pretty well.
That's the first you've been back to Denmark.
That's the first I've been to Denmark. And our trip around the world, we weren't able to, because in going around the world, we had to stay with that one ship.
Yeah.
See, that meant a hotel for us. And the way we would travel, we would stop in the port while they were loading and unloading and loading, because they would pick up cargo all the way along and drop off some cargo. 26 different cities we stopped in, and countries. And of course that was quite a thing. That's the way I like to travel. It was very nice. We got to know the people so well.
Did your father do more than just one? Like, he worked for the Dailies in Wyoming. Did he do Wyoming and Montana and sometimes South Dakota all in one season?
Yes, that's what he would do.
He must have been away from home.
He went on out to one place east of Daly's Ranch. He went way out in the hills, and an old Welshman. I'll never forget how that old man would get out in the morning and cup his hands and yell as far as to come to breakfast or dinner or so on. We all sat in the dining room and learned only about a half dozen shearers that would go to that place, see. But we went along with them and helped to trail the sheep and get them ready in the pens and wranglers, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that as well as tying the wool. That old Welshman was really an old character.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were Lutherans, dyed in the wool and as strict as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. And so you corralled and did some shearing and some stomping. And
I never did any shearing, and I might shear at least once in a while and get Dad to let me shear one or something like that. But when I got home and had my own sheep, then I started the shearing.
Well, then you just were helping with the stomping and the tying and the
yeah, we were supposed to.
wrangling.
The sheep men would come and tell us how to roll the wool to get all the tags and everything in with it. The buyers of the wool, they'd come and tell us, now don't you let the tags go in with the wool. You see?
What are the tags?
The tags are you see on the sheep, they lie down and manure and so on. They get dirt and kind of berries on the wool, ends of the wool, and all around along where they lie down.
Uh-huh.
And of course, when they shore sheep, they shore them clean, and that took all of this stuff along with it. Now Daly would tell us to wrap the fleece up and roll it together like that, and then we'd put a string around it and tie it, and then throw it up. We had the sack on either sacker on either end. There were two sackers, and I'd work along the bench on one side, on one end, and then there'd be another squeeze tire on the other. There's a guy out at Magna that's still living there that went out with me the first time I went out. The name of Ross Anton. And he lived at Springville, and when we left Wyoming, come home, I stopped in Springville at his home one night. But that was quite an experience, you know, for a boy to get out and meet people. I had worked in the shearing trail, both wool buyers and sheepmen and different people,
hobos.
sheep shearers and hobos. And there were a lot of hobos stopped there, and they'd work for a few days maybe and then go on. They might help to wrangle the sheep or most anything. Well, I'd come home and with a pretty good check, and I'd buy a suit of clothes and get all fixed up again for another year.
You were in school at that time. That is, you were going to high school.
The first trip I made out to Wyoming was when I was a freshman. And the next trip, I think, was when I was a junior.
I guess you came back educated then.
Well, I had a liberal education. Father always would give people the impression that here was a son that he expected something of. He didn't expect me to work like he did. You see, parents very often, they feel that way about things. He said he's going to go places in school and going to do differently and work for a living like we do here.
Well, he was right.
Well, I always said that people that I know always expect more of me than I could give.
Well, there's some psychology there, I know. So how many weeks might your father be gone then on these sheep trips?
Well, he'd sometimes be gone all summer. When he went to South Dakota or up into Montana, Idaho. Sometimes shore sheep in Idaho also, on his way to Montana.
This was at the time that, this was after he was marshal and after he'd had the threshing machine?
Yes, this was after the trip as a marshal, because he couldn't go while he was city marshal.
Of course, I guess he could shear and then come back and run the thresher too, couldn't he?
Yes, he couldn't do that, and that's what he did most years. He'd come home and operate, and get the threshing machine ready, and then he'd work with sheep during the winter time. As I say, he'd trim some of them for the fair and for other things.
When I said you come home educated, I meant that it was a hard type people that you dealt with, educated you on the worldly things.
Well, we kind of learned to look after ourselves, you see. We found our own way home, Ross and I, when we took the train from Rawlins, Wyoming, and came home to Salt Lake or Springville or wherever we were going.
Now, you later owned your own sheep. I didn't know that.
Yes, I later bought 10 head of purebred sheep that were registered to W.D. Camlin. He was in the purebred sheep business. I had the papers on them.